under the freezing rain of a New York night. Daniel Hayes held Sophie Lane in his arms, their laughter lost somewhere between raindrops and promises not yet spoken. "You make me want to live again," he whispered, his voice breaking against the storm. "Then live," Sophie answered, her eyes shining. "Start now." That moment wasn't just about love. It was about two broken souls finding the courage to heal, to believe, and to fight for a future they never thought they deserved. Tonight, we invite you to journey through a story of second chances, of stars found in the darkest nights, and a love that refused to be forgotten. If you believe in the magic of small moments and the strength of promises made under the stars, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to follow the full journey of Daniel and Sophie. Now, let's begin. The scent of salt hung heavy in the night air of Oceanside Bay. Clinging to every breath Daniel Hayes took as he sat quietly on the shore, his bare feet buried into the cool, damp sand, feeling the earth's steady heartbeat beneath him. In the distance, waves rose and fell, whispering secrets under the silver gaze of the moon, while tiny lights from ships drifted along the horizon, winking in and out like tired, wandering stars. Daniel was 34 years old, a man who had once stood at the summit of success, carving out a kingdom with nothing but ambition and iron will. But empires fall faster than they rise. A single betrayal had swept it all away, leaving him to pick through the ruins alone. Tonight, he clutched the only thing he could still call his own, an old pocket watch that had belonged to his father. Its surface was worn smooth from years of touch, and in its faint, rhythmic ticking, Daniel found the only tether left to a life he could no longer reach. His dark hair was unkempt, falling across his forehead without care, and his once piercing gray eyes were dulled with an ache too vast to name. Oceanside Bay had not been his plan. He had come here because he needed to breathe, to disappear from the glare of headlines and whispers. The ocean, endless and unjudging, seemed the only place vast enough to carry the weight of everything he had lost. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled carelessly to his elbows, the collar unbuttoned as if even fabric should not dare constrain him anymore. The watch in his hand pointed to midnight, though Daniel had long stopped caring what hour it was. When you are standing in the wreckage of your own life, time becomes just another meaningless thing. A soft shuffle in the sand broke his thoughts. He glanced up, expecting to find a night jogger or a wandering tourist. Instead, he found her. A woman stood a few paces away, her silhouette bathed in the soft glow from a lone street lamp above the boardwalk. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, her brown hair tossed lightly by the breeze, a navy blue blazer slipping from her arm. Her white blouse was rumpled, and the look in her light brown eyes was a mixture of curiosity and a mischief that had somehow survived whatever long day she had escaped. She tilted her head slightly, studying him not with pity, but with a quiet, thoughtful wonder. "You look like you have lost everything," she said gently, her voice threading through the sound of the waves. Her gaze flicked to the pocket watch he held. "But at least you still have that. Not flashy, but it feels precious." Daniel blinked, caught between instinct and surprise. He had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to without judgment or expectation. For a moment, he thought about saying nothing, letting the night swallow them both back into silence. But something about her, the way her eyes softened rather than stared, coaxed a small answer from him. "It is worth more than it looks," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "But it is not something I would ever sell." The woman smiled, slow and warm, without asking. She walked over and sank into the sand a few steps away from him, folding herself into the night like she belonged there. "Good," she said with a lightness that was not careless but kind. People who sell memories always end up chasing ghosts. She stretched her legs out before her, her sneakers dusted with sand, and leaned back on her hands, eyes fixed on the stars above them, as if she had always known how to sit still and listen to the sea. "So, what is it then?" the woman asked, her voice playful. "Lost your fortune? Lost a pet? Or just misplaced your sense of humor somewhere along the way?" A corner of Daniel's mouth twitched, almost against his will. It had been far too long since anyone had spoken to him so lightly. Without the weight of reputation or the fear of offending him, maybe a little bit of everything, he replied dryly, his voice roughened by too many silent nights. He stole a glance at her, trying to piece her together. She did not carry the slow, easy rhythm of a local. There was a sharpness in her wit, a quickness that hinted at long streets and hard lessons. A faint echo of a New York accent danced in her words. "And you?" he asked, nodding slightly toward the navy blazer draped over her arm. "Are you a lawyer, or just someone very good at pretending?" She laughed, a bright, clean sound that rose above the steady crash of the waves, making the night feel lighter somehow. "Bingo," she said, giving a playful salute. "Sophie Lane, attorney at law, defender of lost causes and stubborn fools." She dropped her arm and gave him a mock-serious look. "I am here for work." But today was too heavy, and somehow, this beach sounded better than another lonely hotel room. Then she tilted her head, studying him again. "And you, Mr. Lost Everything, what do they call you?" He hesitated. The name Daniel Hayes still carried an echo of who he had once been, a name that now seemed almost like a bad memory, but there was no judgment in her eyes, only the quiet invitation to be real. "Daniel," he said at last. The name alone, stripped of titles and past glories, just Daniel. She repeated with a teasing smile. "All right then, just Daniel. Are you going to tell me why you are out here, brooding like the tragic hero of a cheap novel?" Or should I start guessing he did not know why he answered? Maybe it was the way the night seemed to stretch endlessly around them. Maybe it was the way she sat there, open and unafraid, not pushing, not pitying. "I built something once," he said finally, fingers absently turning the old watch in his palm, "and then I lost it. Mostly because of my own mistakes." The coolness of the metal pressed against his skin, grounding him. He let the words hang there, carried away slightly by the ocean breeze. "Ever feel like you have run out of chances?" he asked, half to her, half to the stars overhead. Sophie's smile softened, the sparkle in her eyes dimming just a little. She turned her gaze to the restless waves, her voice dropping lower. "More than you would think," she murmured. She hugged her knees to her chest, her posture easy but her words heavy. "I grew up bouncing through foster homes," she said quietly. "You learn early that chances, they are like bus tickets. You do not get many, so you hold tight when you do." Daniel turned to look at her. Truly look. Beneath the playful sarcasm, he saw it, the quiet toughness, the scars carried without complaint. She was not just a stranger who had wandered into his loneliness. She was someone who had learned how to survive her own storms. "And yet, here you are," he said, his voice softer, still laughing at a broken man and his old watch. Sophie shrugged, but a stubborn light burned in her gaze. "You keep going," she said simply. "You find something to hold on to, even if it is small." She smiled at him then, a little crooked, a little sad. "I used to draw. That was my dream once, to be an artist. But then I saw too many kids like me fall through the cracks, so I became a lawyer instead. Figured if I could not save the world with colors, maybe I could fight for it with words." She glanced sideways at him, the mischief sneaking back into her smile. "And you?" she asked, What keeps you moving? Besides that watch, Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not have an answer, not one that made any real sense. The watch had belonged to his father, a man who had once believed Daniel could change the world. Now, it was just a relic of a promise he was not sure he could still keep. "I do not know," he admitted, the words heavier than he intended. "Maybe that is why I am here, trying to figure it out." They fell into an easy rhythm after that, as if old friends had found each other again by accident. Sophie confessed she drank her coffee black and bitter, no sugar allowed, and that once, just to win a bet. She had stayed up an entire night memorizing the lyrics to a forgotten jazz song. Daniel, warmed by her laughter, shared how as a boy he used to sneak onto the roof of his family's old estate, mapping constellations in the dark with nothing but a flashlight and a battered notebook. "There is something about the stars," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "They are always there, even when you cannot see them." Sophie lifted her hand and pointed toward the heavens, where one brilliant star burned brighter than the rest, stubborn against the velvet sky. "Like that one?" she asked, her voice light, but something tender hidden underneath. Daniel followed her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope that maybe not everything was lost after all. "That one there?" Sophie asked, her voice a gentle mix of mischief and wonder. "If you ever see it again, think of me. No pressure, though I'm hard to forget." Daniel laughed, a real, unguarded sound that surprised even himself. It was like a tiny crack in the heavy walls he had spent so long building. "Deal," he said, meeting her eyes with a warmth he had not felt in what seemed like a lifetime. For a brief, reckless moment, he wanted to ask for her number, to keep this fragile connection from slipping away with the tide. But then, like a heavy blanket, doubt settled over him. What could he offer her? He was no longer a man of achievements and titles, just a wandering soul clutching a broken watch and the ruins of his former life. As the first hues of dawn stretched across the sky, painting it in soft purples and muted golds, Sophie rose to her feet, brushing the sand from her jeans. "Well, just Daniel," she said, her smile tinged with a sadness that she could not quite hide. This was nice. "Hold on to that watch." "All right." Daniel stood too, heart thundering against his ribs. The words spilled out before he could stop them. "Sophie," he said, voice catching. "Thank you. For tonight. If fate ever hands me another chance, I swear, I will not waste it. I will not let you go." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment in the soft, uncertain light. A quiet smile curved her lips, small but meaningful. "Fate," she said, her voice soft, "has a way of surprising us." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her figure fading slowly into the blush of the awakening sky. Daniel watched her pause briefly, just for a heartbeat. Glancing back at the watch still clutched in his hand, something flickered in her eyes. Something like recognition, or perhaps a memory buried too deep to name, and then she was gone, leaving behind only the hush of the waves and the space her presence had filled. Daniel sat back down, the sand now warm beneath him as the sun began its slow climb. The star they had shared still lingered stubbornly in the brightening sky, a pale sentinel refusing to vanish. He gripped the old watch tighter, its soft ticking a promise he did not yet fully understand. Sophie Lane, the woman with the easy smile and the brave heart. He did not know her number, or even where she came from. But he knew the sound of her laughter, the courage in her voice, and the way for one single night she had made the loneliness less unbearable. As Sophie made her way back toward her small hotel room, the early light catching in her hair, she felt a strange ache she could not explain. Something about Daniel's watch had stirred a memory she had locked away long ago, a faint image of her mother, the last time she had seen her. clutching a similar watch tightly before Sophie was taken away to the orphanage. She shook her head, pushing the old ghosts down where they belonged. She had long since learned how to build walls, to keep people at just enough distance so they could not hurt her when they inevitably left. But something about Daniel Hayes, his gray eyes, open and wounded, had slipped past her defenses with startling ease. She looked up once more at the fading star, its light barely visible now in the strengthening day, and whispered under her breath, "Please, fate, do not make me regret this." A year later, in the heart of New York City, destiny would indeed prove it had not yet finished weaving their story. The voices around Daniel Hayes droned on about strategic alliances and public goodwill. The plan was simple enough, partnering with a charitable foundation to soften Horizon Tech's image. Daniel sat at the head of the long, glass meeting table, his gray eyes appearing focused, but his mind was adrift, far from the boardroom in the heart of New York. It wandered back to a night by the sea in Oceanside Bay. And a girl named Sophie, a girl whose laughter had stayed lodged in his heart ever since. Many times over the past year, Daniel had tried to find her, typing endless variations of Sophie Lawyer into search engines, chasing nothing but memories. But New York was too vast, and Sophie Lane had become, to him, more a star than a person distant, burning, unreachable. Each time Daniel opened the battered pocket watch tucked into his jacket, he would hear her voice in his mind. "If you see it again, think of me." A sudden swing of the meeting room door yanked him from his thoughts. A woman entered, her stride sure but unpretentious. She wore a soft gray suit that spoke of quiet strength, and though her brown hair was neatly tied, a few strands had slipped free, softening the professional sharpness. Around her neck gleamed a small silver pendant shaped like a star. Peeking from under her collar, Daniel's heart stumbled in his chest. It could not be, and yet it was. Sophie Lane, real, alive, standing no more than a few feet away. "Apologies for being late," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, firm but kind. "I am Sophie Lane, the legal representative for the Hope Foundation, your new charity partner." She smiled politely to the gathered executives, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed inside one stunned man. Daniel pushed back his chair so abruptly it wobbled behind him. Heads turned, curious and confused, but Daniel barely noticed. "I used to wonder," he said, his voice rough with the weight of 100 sleepless nights, "how many lawyers named Sophie there could be in this city." He locked eyes with her, unable to look anywhere else. "Turns out there is only one I could never forget." Sophie blinked, startled. Recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by laughter, a soft, embarrassed sound that lit up the room like sunshine breaking through a heavy sky. "You," she said, pointing at him with mock accusation, her smile both teasing and trembling slightly. "You are that guy, the one brooding over the ocean. I thought you were a failed poet or something." Her tone was playful, but her eyes shimmered with something deeper. A memory. A question left hanging in time. The room had fallen awkwardly silent, filled with exchanged glances and barely concealed curiosity. Daniel smiled, a real, unforced smile. The first in what felt like forever. "Not a poet," he said warmly, "but I can draw a few constellations, if you would like." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the room, the heavy formality lifting like mist. Sophie took her seat across from him, laying out her papers and speaking to the group. But their gazes kept drifting back to each other. Small, secret looks, quick, startled smiles. Daniel's hand brushed the pocket watch hidden in his jacket, feeling its familiar weight. And there, at her throat, the tiny star pendant caught the light and sparkled, as if fate itself was winking at him. She was here, not a dream, not a memory, fading with the tide. Sophie Lane, the woman who once made the world feel wide and full of second chances. The meeting carried on. But Daniel struggled to focus. Sophie spoke about the Hope Foundation with a voice that was sharp and certain when discussing legal terms, but softened when she spoke of the children they fought for, children who had no one to defend them. As Daniel listened, he realized that Sophie was not just the witty, kind stranger from that night. She was a warrior, fierce, compassionate, unyielding. Then he caught a small, almost invisible moment when she spoke of an orphan boy she was helping. Her hand, usually steady, trembled slightly against her notes. "We are trying to make sure this boy is not placed somewhere unsafe," she said, her voice dipping low, heavy with unspoken memories. "Every child deserves a chance." Daniel met her eyes across the room. In that fleeting glance, he saw it the familiar ache he had glimpsed once before, sitting by the sea, the pain she carried quietly, the battle she fought, not just for others, but perhaps still for herself, and somewhere deep within him. Something stirred awake again, hope, fragile but stubborn, refusing to be forgotten. When the meeting ended and the room slowly emptied, Daniel Hayes remained still, his mind a whirlwind of unspoken words. Finally, as Sophie Lane gathered her files, he found his voice. "Sophie," he called, his tone low but steady, reaching through the space between them. "Do you have a minute?" She turned, a teasing smile curling on her lips as she crossed her arms casually. "1 minute, just Daniel," she said, her voice light, but her eyes serious underneath. "I have a mountain of paperwork waiting for me," yet she did not walk away. She stayed, standing there in the warm hush of the afternoon, sunlight pouring through the glass walls and painting everything gold. Daniel closed the distance between them with slow, careful steps, until only a few feet separated them. "I looked for you," he said, his voice roughened by the truth he carried for so long. "After that night, I tried, but all I knew was your name, and that you were a lawyer who fights for those no one else sees. New York swallowed my search. I thought maybe I would never find you again." Sophie raised an eyebrow, the corners of her mouth tugging into a small, surprised smile. "Really?" she said, her voice softer now. "I thought you were just some lonely guy who brooded by the ocean, not the type to chase shadows across a city." She hesitated, her gaze flickering with something unspoken. "But," she added, her voice barely above a whisper, "I remembered too. It is not easy to forget someone who talks about constellations at 3 a.m. They stood in silence for a moment, the city's noise a distant hum beyond the glass, as if the world outside had paused to give them this quiet space. Daniel wanted to tell her everything, how he had changed, how much he had thought of her, but part of him still feared that she would see through him, see not the man he once promised to be, but the man who was still clawing his way out of failure. Instead, he offered her something smaller, something truer. "You are still wearing it," he said, nodding toward the silver star glinting at her throat. "It reminds me of that night." Sophie touched the pendant lightly, her fingers brushing it with unconscious tenderness. "I always wear it," she said simply. "It reminds me that even on the worst days, there is always a little hope left, somewhere." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "And you?" she asked. "Do you still have it?" In answer, Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out the battered pocket watch. He held it up for her to see, its surface catching the light. "Never leaves me," he said quietly. The old watch ticked faintly between them, as if sharing their heartbeat, their fragile memories, their promises left unsaid. A knock at the door broke the moment. Daniel's assistant poked his head in, reminding him of an important call waiting. Sophie stepped back, the spell between them loosening but not breaking. Duty calls. CEO, she said with a half smile, half sigh. Do not let me keep you from your kingdom. She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway, glancing back one last time. It was good to see you again. Daniel, she said, her voice threaded with something almost tender. This time, do not leave it all to fate. Daniel smiled, something inside him lighter than it had been in many long months. I will not, he promised. He watched her disappear into the bustling hallway crowd, her figure growing smaller but somehow even more vivid in his mind. Back in his office, Daniel sat alone, his hand resting over the pocket watch as if anchoring himself to the moment they had just shared. Sophie Lane was not a dream or a memory. She was real. She was here. And somehow, she had stepped back into his life exactly when the ground beneath him was threatening to crumble again. But he knew the storms were gathering. The pressure from the Hayes Corporation, led by those who still sought to control him, was tightening around Horizon Tech. If he faltered, he might lose everything, including this new, delicate chance with Sophie. Meanwhile, across the city in a tiny Brooklyn office filled with case files and the weight of endless battles, Sophie sat at her cluttered desk, staring blankly at a worn folder labeled Ethan Carter, a boy whose wide, fearful eyes reminded her too much of herself once. Seeing Daniel again had unsettled her more than she dared admit. She told herself she had no time for foolish dreams about a man with gray eyes and a broken watch. Yet when she touched the star pendant at her throat, a faint smile betrayed her better judgment. Fate, she whispered into the quiet room. You certainly have a strange sense of humor. Outside her window, autumn leaves spiraled in the golden air, as if carrying the promises of second chances. Though the days at Horizon Tech grew heavier with each passing hour, the pressure from the Hayes Corporation tightening like an invisible noose, Daniel Hayes found his mind drifting again and again toward one place of light: Sophie Lane. Since that unexpected meeting weeks ago, she had become the rare spark in his increasingly stifling world. While outwardly, Daniel remained the composed CEO charcoal gray suit crisp, tie loose around his neck in a deliberate nod to casual authority inside. Thoughts of her softened the edges of his days. The old pocket watch, forever tucked in his jacket, seemed to tick with a gentler rhythm when she was near. He found excuses to be around her, convincing himself it was all for the sake of the charity project. But every conversation stretched longer than necessary, meandering away from legal terms into laughter about favorite foods, childhood dreams, and forgotten constellations. One evening, he even called her close to midnight, under the guise of needing legal advice. Sophie, he had said, trying and failing to keep a straight tone, hypothetically speaking. If a contract looks fine, but feels risky, should I panic? On the other end, he could almost hear her smile. Daniel, she teased, her voice low and amused. It is almost midnight. Next time, just admit you miss hearing my voice. He chuckled, feeling the warmth rise to his cheeks, a sensation unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. One crisp afternoon, they met at a tiny cafe tucked near Horizon Tech's towering office. Daniel sat across from Sophie, pretending to focus as she poked absently at her salad. You are staring at me, she said suddenly, one eyebrow lifting in mock suspicion. Like I'm some high-risk, long-term investment. Daniel burst into laughter, the kind that turned heads but made him not care. I do not invest carelessly, he said, feigning a serious air. But if you were a stock, Sophie Lane, I would buy every share and never sell. He added a quick wink, a move so unlike him that it made his own heart stumble. Sophie flushed, caught off guard, but recovered fast, jabbing her fork toward him. That, she declared with mock sternness, was unbelievably cheesy. But, she added, grinning, I will give you extra points for effort. Their laughter mingled and filled the small cafe, until for a moment, it felt like there was no world outside those walls. Only two people learning how to smile again. Sophie was not one to let Daniel get too comfortable, though. During a crowded joint meeting between Horizon Tech and the Hope Foundation, as Daniel adjusted his tie for what must have been the fifth nervous time, Sophie, seated near the front, leaned forward and whispered just loudly enough, "Need a hand with that tie, boss." The room erupted into laughter, and Daniel, who had once commanded boardrooms with an iron gaze, found himself flushing like a boy caught daydreaming. He shot her a mock glare, though his eyes were bright with amusement. "Miss Lane," he said gravely, "I will make sure this disruption is noted in the meeting minutes." More laughter rippled through the room, and from that day forward, quiet rumors began to swirl, whispers of the reserved CEO and the witty, fearless lawyer, not one to let a challenge pass unanswered. Daniel decided a small retaliation was in order. The next afternoon, Sophie received a carefully packed bento box at her Brooklyn office, tucked neatly among her towering case files. On top was a handwritten note, homemade, for your stellar legal services. When she opened the box, the unmistakable aroma of sushi, her favorite, floated up. She stared at it, then immediately dialed his number, laughing so hard she barely got the words out. "Daniel Hayes, you fraud," she accused between breaths. "Homemade. This looks like it came straight from that Japanese restaurant you love, pretending you do not know." Daniel's voice was smooth and low through the receiver. "I neither confirm nor deny," he said, "but just eat it." Sophie shook her head, still laughing as she picked up a piece of perfectly rolled sushi. Across the miles between them, it felt like they were sitting together again, sharing a moment stitched with laughter, small kindnesses, and something beginning to bloom quietly between the cracks. Sophie shook her head, smiling despite herself as she bit into a piece of sushi. She could feel it, the slow, inevitable tug at her defenses. Daniel was winning their playful little game. And part of her was no longer sure she wanted to win, but not every moment between them was filled with laughter. In quiet spaces, when the world stopped spinning so loudly, Daniel found himself admiring Sophie for something deeper than her quick wit or easy humor. He saw the way she fought not for herself, but for others, especially those who had no one else standing for them. He had heard about the boy she was fighting for, Ethan, a small name on a heavy file, a child shuffled from one uncaring system to another. One gray afternoon, Daniel stopped by Sophie's cramped Brooklyn office to drop off documents. He found her buried beneath piles of paperwork, her shoulders tense, her eyes red as if she had just wiped away tears. "Sophie," he said gently. Stepping further inside, she startled, blinking rapidly, and offered a shaky smile. "Just the dust," she said, waving a hand vaguely at the old building. "This place could probably give someone an allergy lawsuit." Daniel did not argue. He simply pulled up a chair and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his steady presence, and he waited silent, patient, offering his company the way a true friend would. After a long moment, Sophie let out a sigh, her voice trembling. "Ethan reminds me of me," she whispered, alone, unwanted. "I am terrified that if I fail him, he will think he is not worth saving." Her words cut through the room like a knife, and Daniel saw it then, the vulnerable, fierce heart hidden beneath all her armor. Without hesitation, he reached out and took her hand gently but firmly, grounding her. "You are not alone," he said, voice low, certain. "Not then, not now. Ethan has you. And you have me, for a heartbeat." She only stared at him, surprised. Then her fingers tightened around his, and a small, Broken smile appeared. "Thank you," she whispered. The setting sun poured through the dusty window, wrapping them in a soft gold light. In that quiet moment, something invisible and unbreakable wove itself between them. Healing, Daniel realized, often did not come with grand gestures. Sometimes it was found in simple, stubborn presence. Later that week, Daniel offered to join Sophie on a visit to the temporary shelter where Ethan was staying. He was not sure what he expected, perhaps to glimpse her world more clearly, but what he found was something far more profound. He watched Sophie kneel beside Ethan, teaching him how to draw a star, her voice full of gentle encouragement. The boy's small fingers gripped a pencil tightly, his concentration fierce, his smile cautious. Daniel, clumsy and uncertain, knelt beside them and tried to sketch his own star. The result was a wobbly, lopsided mess. "You draw so bad," Ethan giggled, covering his mouth with both hands. Sophie burst into laughter, her eyes crinkling with real joy as she glanced at Daniel. "Definitely not CEO material when it comes to art," she teased, but her voice was soft, full of affection. For the first time, Sophie felt a companionship that was more than words. It was action, quiet and unwavering. In return, Sophie helped Daniel face the shadows of his own fears. One evening, as they sat on a weathered bench in Bryant Park, the city lights blinking like distant galaxies, Daniel spoke into the cool air. "They want me back," he said, voice heavy. "My family. They want to pull me back under their control. There was a time when I believed, if I did not succeed, I was nothing." Sophie reached for his hand, squeezing it gently but firmly. "You do not have to prove anything to them," she said. "You built Horizon Tech from nothing. Daniel, it is yours, not theirs. Do not let them take your soul just to polish their name." Her words were a spark, igniting something inside him he thought had long gone cold. Their bond deepened through small, clumsy, beautiful moments. One afternoon, determined to impress her, Daniel showed up at her office with a coffee cup in hand. "Consider this a peace offering," he said proudly. "Thanks for putting up with me." Sophie took a sip and immediately grimaced. "My God. Daniel," she said, laughing. "Is this coffee or dishwater?" She took another exaggerated sip just to see the embarrassed look on his face. "Stick to running companies," she teased, her eyes alight with laughter. Another evening, as they strolled along the Hudson River, Sophie pointed upward. "Think that is the same star we saw by the beach?" she asked. Half teasing, half wistful, Daniel looked at her, the weight of everything he felt tightening in his chest. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I do not need a star to remember you." His words caught her off guard. Sophie turned quickly, pretending to cough, but the blush blooming on her cheeks betrayed her. When his hand brushed lightly against hers, she did not pull away. Instead, her fingers brushed his, a quiet promise blooming between them, tender and unspoken. Their fingers brushed, and for a fleeting moment, they lightly intertwined, a silent exchange, too delicate to hold on to, but too meaningful to ignore. There was the time Daniel, in a rare burst of mischief, tried to surprise Sophie with a drawing, a star inspired by the night they once shared by the ocean. He had worked late into the night, determined to capture what she meant to him on paper. The result, unfortunately, looked more like a wilted flower than any constellation. Sophie had stared at it for a long second before bursting into laughter. Not polite, restrained laughter, but the kind that shook her shoulders and made tears stream down her cheeks. "Daniel," she gasped between fits of laughter, "I once dreamed of becoming an artist, but you should never even consider it." Still giggling, she grabbed a piece of tape and stuck the chaotic little star to the side of her desk. "I am keeping this," she declared with mock seriousness, "to remind me that you are brilliant just in fields that do not involve a pencil." Daniel only shook his head, defeated but grinning, his heart light with the joy of seeing her laugh so freely, despite the laughter, despite the late-night calls and quiet shared looks. An invisible wall lingered between them. Daniel feared the storm gathering over his life, the relentless pressure from his family, the looming threat over Horizon Tech. He worried that if he stumbled, if he failed again, Sophie would see him not as the man standing before her, but as the broken figure once lost by the sea. Sophie, for all her brave smiles and clever words, was afraid too, afraid of letting someone in completely, afraid that even Daniel, with his steady gaze and patient heart, might one day walk away like so many before him. The ongoing struggle to save Ethan reminded her how fragile hope could be. Every small setback in court gnawed at her belief that she could make a difference. And yet, every moment she shared with Daniel, every clumsy coffee, every crooked drawing, every whispered conversation under the city lights wore down those fears a little more. One evening, after another long day, Daniel insisted on walking Sophie home. They stood outside her Brooklyn building, the street lamp overhead casting a soft halo around her, making her star necklace shimmer against her sweater. "You know," Daniel said, his voice quiet, almost reverent, "I never thought I could laugh this much again. Thank you, Sophie," she smiled, eyes bright with unspoken feelings. "Do not thank me," she teased, bumping her shoulder lightly against his. "Just keep making those fake homemade bentos, and we will call it even." They laughed together, their laughter carrying lightly into the night air, and for a breathless moment, their gazes locked, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Neither dared to name what was growing between them, but it was there, undeniable, fierce, and terrifyingly beautiful. Sophie turned and disappeared into her building, her hand instinctively brushing the little star at her throat. Her heart raced, wild and unsteady. Daniel walked away slowly, his fingers brushing the pocket watch in his jacket, a smile ghosting across his lips. Above them, under the vast New York sky, the stars kept their silent vigil witness to two hearts quietly, stubbornly finding their way toward each other. As autumn deepened across the New York suburbs, golden breezes swept through sprawling fields, and the countryside was dressed in vibrant reds and golds. Sunlight filtered through the branches of maple trees, scattering patterns like old dreams on the ground. Daniel and Sophie stood together before a small charity center in rural Westchester, a modest red brick building framed by a shaded garden. They were there to inspect the new facility, part of the growing partnership between Horizon Tech and the Hope Foundation. Daniel, dressed in a simple navy shirt and slacks, looked more at ease than usual, though a faint line of tension still marked his brow, a shadow from the ongoing battle with his family. Sophie, in a light gray sweater and jeans, her brown hair loosely tied back, blended effortlessly into the crisp morning air, her smile as warm and steady as the sunlight. Children burst through the doors of the center, their laughter filling the garden like music. Without hesitation, Sophie knelt down among them, her presence easy, natural. She pulled colored pencils from her bag and began sketching a large, brilliant star on a piece of paper, encouraging the children to make it shine with colors of their own. Daniel stood a few steps away, hands tucked into his pockets, simply watching her. He did not just see Sophie Lane, the woman who had captured his heart. He saw how she brought light wherever she went, how she had become a lighthouse, not only for lost children, but for him too. And in that moment, surrounded by golden leaves and bright laughter, Daniel realized something simple and terrifying. He had not just found someone to love, he had found someone to believe in. Daniel, A man who once believed he was destined to wander in darkness, realized in that moment something deeper than love. He loved the world Sophie carried inside her. A world where even broken things could find a way to heal. You know, he said, stepping closer, his voice warm and teasing, you are a star yourself. Sophie Lane, she looked up at him, narrowing her eyes in mock annoyance. Do not just stand there throwing compliments like confetti. Mr. Hayes, she said, pick up a pencil and get your hands dirty. Or are you scared? A little boy nearby waved a red pencil at him, giggling. Before Daniel could protest, Sophie grabbed his hand and pulled him down onto the grass, thrusting a blank sheet of paper into his lap, clumsily. Daniel tried to draw a star or something resembling one. The result was a crooked mess, lines bending at strange angles. I am terrible at this, he muttered under his breath. Sophie laughed, patting his shoulder with easy affection. It is perfect, she said. You are showing the kids that stars do not have to be flawless to shine. The children nodded solemnly, and Daniel looked at her, his heart hammering against his ribs. She had that gift, the ability to turn even imperfections into something precious. These small, quiet moments piled up between them like scattered pebbles along the slow, inevitable river of something bigger, something neither dared yet name. After long, grueling days filled with tense meetings and corporate battles, Daniel found a quiet joy in leaving small surprises for Sophie. A carefully packed bento box would appear outside her office door, salmon salad one day, tempura sushi, the next always accompanied by a handwritten note. Eat this. Do not let paperwork swallow you whole, Sophie. Though she grumbled loudly about her mysterious desk intruder, kept every single note tucked safely away in a drawer. Sometimes, on the loneliest nights, she would reread them and smile. One sunny afternoon, Sophie turned the tables. She appeared at Horizon Tech's sleek office, slipping a folded piece of paper into Daniel's hands with a shrug. So you will not fall asleep during your boring meetings, she said. When he unfolded it, he found a simple, vibrant drawing, a star, its yellow and blue colors intertwined. In the corner, she had written, "This star will not fall. Do not worry." Daniel smiled slowly, folding the drawing with great care and sliding it into his wallet, as if it were the most valuable thing he owned. I will keep it, he said, his voice low and certain. And you too, if you will let me. Sophie flushed pink, turning quickly to hide her smile. You are getting dangerously good at cheesy lines. Daniel Hayes, she mumbled, but her heart raced in her chest. Small gestures, quiet promises. Brick by brick, they were tearing down the walls they had spent years building around their hearts. The most unforgettable memory came on a rainy day in the heart of Manhattan. They had just wrapped up a meeting with the Hope Foundation when the sky cracked open, releasing a sudden, wild downpour. Laughing, they sprinted toward a small cafe, huddling under the narrow awning, the warm neon lights spilling out around them. The rain hammered the streets, filling gutters and splashing onto the sidewalk, drowning out even the city's endless noise. Sophie, soaked and breathless, shook the wet strands of hair from her forehead, her eyes sparkling with laughter. It is unfair, she teased, poking his crumpled suit jacket. How you still manage to look like a polished CEO in this weather, Daniel laughed, running a hand through his dripping hair. Polished, he said, his grin wide. You should see yourself. You look like a hurricane in sneakers. He reached out instinctively to brush a raindrop from her cheek but hesitated, his hand hovering close to her skin. Too aware of how little distance remained between them, Sophie caught the hesitation in his eyes. Without a second thought, she grabbed his hand and yanked him out from under the awning, straight into the torrential rain. You have never danced in the rain, she shouted, laughing wildly. And just like that, the city around them disappeared. There was no boardroom, no battles, no past, only them laughing, spinning clumsily in the pouring rain. Two souls daring to live for this moment, daring to hope. You must have had such a sad childhood, Sophie said suddenly, her voice carrying over the sound of the falling rain. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, but let her lead. The cold rain seeped into his clothes, clinging to his skin, but he barely noticed. All he saw was her arms outstretched, spinning like a child, laughter rising pure and bright into the stormy night, and for the first time in years, Daniel let go. He caught her hand, pulling her into a clumsy, joyous dance right there on the drenched sidewalk. They bumped into each other, slipping and laughing until their sides ached. The city forgotten around them. A passing bus sent a wave of rainwater splashing toward them. Sophie shrieked, grabbing onto Daniel's jacket as they stumbled back, drenched and breathless, without thinking. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. The streetlights caught the silver glint of her star necklace, shining against the rain-soaked fabric of her sweater, a small, steady beacon in the chaos. He tightened his grip, his heart pounding so hard he could hardly breathe. "Sophie," he whispered, the rain and emotion roughening his voice. "You make me want to live again, to live all the moments I thought I had missed." She looked up at him, her breath misting in the cool air. "Then live," she said softly, her eyes wide and unwavering. "Start now." They stood together beneath the raging sky, hands tightly clasped, and despite the storm drenching them, an inexplicable warmth bloomed between them, a shelter built not from walls, but from the fragile, stubborn courage of their hearts. Back at the office, Daniel sat alone, staring out at the rain streaking the glass. He could not erase the image of Sophie spinning in the storm, her laughter filling the night like music. For the first time in longer than he dared admit, he believed he could be more than the CEO, more than the son of a broken dynasty. He could love and be loved. He could be just Daniel, but deep inside, fear clung to him. The mistakes of his past, the looming threat of his family, they whispered that he could lose everything all over again. Each time he opened the pocket watch he kept close to his heart. He asked himself if he was strong enough to hold on to this fragile happiness. Across the river, in a small Brooklyn apartment, Sophie sat by her window, watching the rain fall in shimmering sheets. She touched the star pendant at her throat, thinking of Daniel, thinking of his terrible drawings, his uncertain smiles, the way his eyes had shone in the rain. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this, that Daniel Hayes was not another person who would vanish. Yet even now, the old fear whispered at the edges of her mind. What if she opened her heart fully, and he disappeared like all the others? Still, the days that followed wove more tiny promises between them. Daniel brought her black coffee before a crucial court hearing, slipping a small note beneath the cup. "You will win. Star." In return, Sophie stuck a ridiculous star-shaped sticker on the lid of his laptop, making him chuckle when he discovered it mid-meeting. Every small act was a step forward, tentative, hopeful, building something real in the quiet spaces between their fears. One evening, walking through a small park near the office, Sophie pointed at a bright star twinkling above the darkened skyline. "Think that is our star?" she asked, her voice light as the wind. Daniel glanced at her, his expression softer than the night itself. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I know I want to see it every night. As long as you are by my side." His words left her silent, wordlessly. She reached out, taking his hand, threading her fingers tightly through his, under the indifferent stars. In the middle of a bustling, uncertain city, they found certainty not in promises or declarations, but in the quiet, stubborn act of holding on. But fate, unpredictable as ever, was not finished testing them yet. New York's nights grew colder as November deepened, winter's breath sharp against the skin. The neon blaze of Times Square flickered against rain-slick sidewalks. The city both vibrant and weary. On the 32nd floor of Horizon Tech, Daniel sat alone in his dark office. The faint blue light from his computer cast long shadows across the room, outlining the fatigue on his face. At 34, he had built Horizon Tech from the ruins of a name he once thought defined him. He had clawed his way out of the ashes, but now he could feel the storm returning heavier, closer. And this time, he knew the cost might not only be his dreams, but also the fragile, beautiful life he had just begun to believe he deserved. Horizon Tech stood perilously close to the edge. The Hayes Corporation, led by Daniel's ambitious uncle, Charles Hayes, had made him an offer that was almost impossible to ignore. If he agreed, they would acquire Horizon Tech, restoring the reputation, the fortune, and the social standing Daniel had once lost. But the true price was not written in bold letters. It was his freedom. Accepting the deal meant stepping back into the gilded prison he had fought so desperately to escape. It meant wearing the family's chains again, smiling while losing everything that made him who he had become. Daniel turned the battered pocket watch over in his hand. Its silver face, worn smooth from years of touch, caught the faint light of his office. The steady ticking echoed inside the silent room, a small, stubborn heartbeat trying to calm the storm raging within him. Outside the towering glass windows, New York glittered in restless brilliance. But Daniel's mind was not on the city. It was on her, Sophie Lane, her quick, brilliant smile, the spark in her light brown eyes, the way she made him truly believe, that he could be something more than a name on a skyscraper. Every small moment with her, from the bento boxes he had left outside her door to the wild dance in the rain, shimmered like gems scattered across the wreckage of his life. He knew the truth. Signing the deal would not just drag him back into his family's grasp, it would pull Sophie in too, into a world of ruthless transactions, hidden betrayals, and endless games. It would taint everything good he had finally found. Yet if he refused, Horizon Tech could collapse. And with it, the fragile proof that he had built something real not just for himself, but for her, for them. The choice was a blade, cutting him in two. Daniel paced the dark office, his eyes falling to the bulletin board above his desk. Pinned there, simple but shining, was the drawing Sophie had given him, the yellow and blue star. This star will not fall. Do not worry. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over the paper. Fear, raw and suffocating, swelled inside him. He was not afraid of losing a company. He was terrified of losing her. The one person who made him believe he could live free. The one person who had seen him, truly seen him, and stayed. Did he have the strength to fight for both, or would he lose her? Just like everything else across the city, in a small Brooklyn office lit by the warm glow of an aging desk lamp, Sophie worked deep into the night. Case files on Ethan's future surrounded her, but her mind and heart were heavy elsewhere. She had discovered something troubling buried deep within the acquisition contract, a clause that would allow the Hayes Corporation to reallocate charity budgets. The very center where Ethan stayed would lose funding if the deal went through. This was not just a technicality. This was everything. It cut straight to the oldest, deepest wound she carried, the fear that those she trusted would always choose power, leaving her behind like everyone else had. She touched the star necklace at her throat, seeking its quiet strength. But her heart trembled. She remembered Daniel's eyes the night they first met, gray, wounded, reaching for something beyond pain. She remembered the promise he had made under the stars. If fate gives me another chance, I will not let you go. Now she wondered bitterly if fate was laughing at them both. The next morning, Sophie stormed into Horizon Tech's office, her resolve sharp and burning. She found Daniel standing by the window, his charcoal gray suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, as if he had not slept. He turned at her entrance, a flicker of his familiar smile appearing, but it faded quickly when he saw the fierce light in her eyes. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor that lurked beneath. "We need to talk about the acquisition contract." He gestured toward the chair across from him, but she remained standing, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if holding herself together. "I read it," she said, her tone cutting through the heavy silence. "The charity budget clause, it will gut the funding for the center, the place Ethan and so many others depend on." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. Her eyes locked on his. "Those kids need that center. Daniel, you know how much this matters to me." She paused, breathing hard, her heart aching, but more than that. Her voice dropped, raw and breaking. "I need to know what you will choose, not just for Horizon Tech, not just for appearances." Her arms loosened slightly, her vulnerability shining through the anger. "I need to know if you will choose us, if you will choose you." And in the silent office, under the cold light of another gray New York morning, the future hung trembling in the balance. "Your company or your soul," Sophie said, her voice quiet but razor sharp. "Horizon Tech or your family's shadow, freedom or the illusion of power." Her words cut through Daniel like a blade sharp, merciless, leaving nowhere to hide. He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell her he had not chosen yet, that he was trying to protect her, trying to protect everything he had built. But the words crumbled before they reached his mouth. His hand tightened around the pocket watch in his jacket, the small, battered anchor he could no longer feel, steady against the storm inside him. Finally, he found his voice. Rough and broken. "Sophie," he said, "I do not want to hurt you, but it is not that simple." He paused, struggling, searching for a path that did not exist. "If I refuse, Horizon Tech could fall apart. But if I agree—" He trailed off, the rest too painful to say aloud. If he agreed, he would lose himself. He would lose her. Sophie shook her head slowly, her eyes shining with disappointment, not rage, not bitterness, just a deep, aching sadness. "I thought you were different," she whispered, and the words pierced deeper than any shout could have. "I thought you would fight for what is right, not for the Hayes name." She took a breath, her arms crossing tightly over her chest as if bracing herself. "But if you choose them, Daniel, you are not just giving up Horizon Tech. You are giving up me." Without waiting for his answer, she turned and walked away. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step hammering against Daniel's chest until the silence left behind felt unbearable. In the days that followed, Daniel was trapped in a battlefield no one else could see. He knew in his heart that refusing the deal was the only way to stay true to himself, but the fear of failure, of becoming once more the man who had sat alone on a beach, lost and worthless, clung to him like a second skin. He remembered the nights after his family's collapse, the ocean stretching endlessly before him, the coldness of defeat settling into his bones. He could not become that broken man again, but neither could he become his family's puppet, and so he ran not outwardly, not yet but inwardly. He began avoiding Sophie. He skipped Hope Foundation meetings. He let her messages sit unanswered. But every night, when the world was silent, he pulled out the star drawing she had given him, staring at it as if willing himself to remember who he was supposed to be. And every night, he asked himself the same brutal question: would he have the courage to choose love, to choose freedom, or would he always be a prisoner to the name he despised? Meanwhile, Sophie buried herself in her work. She fought tooth and nail for Ethan's case, determined to give the boy a future better than the one she had once been handed. Every time she looked into Ethan's wide, fearful eyes, she saw the lonely girl she used to be, waiting for someone, anyone, to believe she was worth saving. Winning the case was not just justice for Ethan. It was her way of rewriting the story she had once lived. Yet even amidst the battle, Daniel haunted her. She remembered his laughter under the rain, the way he had held her hand like it was the most precious thing he had ever touched. Now she feared he would choose the easy path and leave her behind like so many before him. The turning point came one cold, restless night. Daniel made the decision he thought would spare her. He could not face dragging Sophie into the war he had been born into. He could not bear to see the disappointment in her eyes once more, and so, quietly, he chose to disappear. He packed what little he needed and slipped away from the life he had built. Before he left, he crept into Sophie's small Brooklyn office, the familiar space filled with stacks of hopeful dreams and battles fought. He placed a letter on her desk, weighted down by the pocket watch, the most precious thing he owned. A piece of himself he could not take with him. The letter read, "Sophie, thank you for showing me the light I thought I had lost forever. You are the brightest star in my darkest nights. But I am not worthy not of you, not of Horizon Tech. Please keep this watch, and whenever you see it, remember that somewhere out there, I am wishing you every happiness, Daniel." He stepped out into the freezing New York night, the wind cutting through his coat like knives. He felt hollow, stripped bare, but he told himself it was better this way, that surrendering was the only way to protect her. He did not know that this decision, this heartbreaking goodbye, would become the moment that changed everything. The next morning, Sophie found the letter waiting on her desk. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, her breath catching at the sight of the pocket watch lying silently atop the page. Tears welled in her eyes as she read his words, each line a dagger, each confession a wound. Her heart shattered, not from betrayal, but from sorrow. He had not just run from his family, he had run from her, from himself, from the life they might have had together. And as she held the watch tightly against her chest, her tears fell freely because she realized that loving him meant fighting not just for him, but also for the part of himself he had yet to believe was worth saving. Sophie clutched the letter in trembling hands, the weight of the pocket watch heavy in her palm. Her mind raced back to that night in Oceanside Bay when Daniel, with wounded gray eyes, had promised, "If fate gives me another chance, I will not let you go." And yet, here he was letting her go. The pain of it, sharper than any rejection, cut deep into her chest. Without thinking, she rushed from her office into the chilled morning, dialing his number again and again with no answer. The city blurred around her, the cold wind whipping her hair as she made her way to his Manhattan apartment. Under a sky sprinkled with fading stars, she banged on his door. When it finally opened, Daniel stood there, stunned, his eyes wide with shock and something achingly vulnerable. "Sophie," he began, his voice rough, but she cut him off, lifting the pocket watch between them like a shield, her voice shaking with a storm of anger and grief. "Do not," she said fiercely. "You do not get to do this. You do not get to walk away and leave this." She shook the watch slightly, like it meant nothing. "You do not get to pretend everything we built can just disappear." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing under the hallway light, raw and fearless. "I used to believe I was the kid nobody wanted," she said, her voice breaking. "I have spent my whole life terrified that everyone I let in would eventually leave. But that night, You made me believe I was worth remembering. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But she stood tall. If one night could carry you in my heart for all this time, then I know I need you. Not because I am afraid of being alone, but because you made me believe I deserved more. She took a breath, steadying herself. Do not leave. Daniel, not for me. For you. Stay because you finally believe you deserve to. Her words cut through the thick darkness clouding his mind, piercing into the place he had buried all his fear, all his hope. Daniel looked at her, at the fierce light shining from within her, at the star pendant glinting against her chest, and finally saw the truth he had been too afraid to face. He did not need the Hayes name. He did not need power or status. He had her. He had himself. He stepped forward, reaching for her with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from release. He pulled her tightly into his arms, anchoring himself in her warmth, her realness. I am sorry, he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. I am not going anywhere. He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his hands framing her face. I choose you, he said. I choose us. Under the fading stars, they stood hand in hand, the pocket watch between them, like a vow renewed. Daniel knew the battles ahead would be fierce, facing his family, rebuilding what he had almost thrown away, but he was no longer afraid. He had Sophie. And that was all the strength he needed. Days later, Sophie received a call from the court they had won Ethan's case. The boy would finally be placed with a kind, loving foster family. She rushed to tell Daniel, and when she did, he listened with pride glowing in his eyes. He went with her to meet Ethan, standing quietly as the boy, beaming with happiness, handed Sophie a drawing of a giant, shimmering star. Watching them together, Sophie felt something inside her heal. A part of her long frozen in fear and loneliness thawed at last. Inspired by Sophie's unwavering heart, Daniel announced a bold new direction for Horizon Tech. At a team meeting, his voice steady and resolute, he declared, "We are not just building technology, we are building hope." It was not just a rejection of the Hayes Corporation's offer. It was a declaration that he would live, truly live on his own terms, for the people who mattered. Starting with her, soon after, Daniel and Sophie returned to the charity center in Westchester. They sat together on the soft grass, autumn sunlight wrapping them in gold, watching the children race and laugh under the wide open sky. Sophie pulled a sheet of paper from her bag, drawing a star and handing it to him with a shy smile. "This," she said softly, "is to remind you that you do not need to be anyone else, just mine." Daniel smiled, pulling her into his arms. The paper star pressed between them like a second promise. And under the warm afternoon sun, they knew whatever the future held, they would face it together. Above them, an early star twinkled in the pale sky, bearing silent witness to a promise that was no longer made just for one night, but for a lifetime. Choosing to stand against his family had not come easily. Rejecting the Hayes Corporation meant facing financial uncertainty and skeptical investors. But Daniel, inspired by Sophie, the woman who had brought light into the darkest corners of his life, had remade Horizon Tech into something far greater than just a company. It became a symbol of rebirth. Not only did they pioneer new advances in technology, but Daniel and Sophie together launched a fund dedicated to orphaned children, partnering with Sophie's beloved Hope Foundation. The fund was not just another project, it was their way of healing the wounds they both carried away to offer hope to children like Ethan, children who deserved a future brighter than their beginnings. Standing by the tall windows of his office, Daniel watched as soft snow fell over New York's skyline, blanketing the restless city in a rare, delicate stillness. He touched the pocket watch tucked inside his suit, feeling the familiar, steady ticking against his chest. Once, it had been the only thing anchoring him through long, lonely days. Now, it was a reminder of Sophie, of the night they met by the sea, of her laughter in the rain, of the moment she had stood under a starry sky and given him the courage to stay. She was, and always would be, his brightest star, and no matter what storms the future held, Daniel knew one thing with unshakable certainty: he would never let her go again. Across the city, in her small Brooklyn office, Sophie sat by the window, where snow dusted the ledge like scattered stardust. The case that had consumed so much of her heart, Ethan's fight for a safe home, had ended in victory. The boy was thriving with a foster family who loved him fiercely. It was not just a professional triumph, it was proof that she could change someone's fate, just as she had once wished someone would change hers. She touched the star necklace resting at her throat, a tender smile curving her lips. She remembered the fear she had once carried, the terror of opening her heart only to be abandoned again. But Daniel had stayed, not just for her, but for himself, and because of that, she believed finally and fully that she was worthy of love, worthy of belonging. In the months after Daniel's defiant stand against his family, they worked side by side, tirelessly building the Orphan Support Fund. They traveled to shelters, met children, organized small art sessions where the kids drew their dreams in bold colors. Daniel, ever clumsy with pencils, insisted on joining in. His stars were always crooked, more like potatoes than constellations. And every time, Sophie laughed until her sides hurt. "You are the worst artist CEO I have ever met," she teased, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Daniel only grinned, pulling her close and whispering against her hair, "But I am the best at keeping you." Their love grew not through grand declarations, but through the small things. Daniel kept leaving bento boxes outside Sophie's door, now with handwritten notes quoting silly facts about stars he found online. Sophie retaliated by sneaking into his office and plastering glittery star stickers on every available surface, making the Horizon Tech team chuckle whenever they passed by their flustered boss. Each tiny gesture was a brick laid quietly in the home they were building together, not for one night, but for a lifetime. The most unforgettable evening came on a winter night in Greenwich Village. A small, cozy restaurant bathed in the golden glow of candles and soft lights strung along the red brick walls. The air smelled of cinnamon and laughter. Daniel and Sophie sat across from each other, she in a simple deep green dress, her brown hair falling loose around her shoulders, he in a crisp white shirt and a soft gray suit, elegant yet relaxed. Dinner was filled with teasing and shared memories, Sophie laughing as she recalled the time Daniel broke a coffee machine trying to impress her, Daniel countering with the story of Sophie dropping sushi on her shirt during a meeting and trying unsuccessfully to pretend it never happened. When dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate mousse, topped with a single gold-dusted berry, Daniel's smile softened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it carefully on the table between them. Sophie raised an eyebrow, playful but curious, the flickering candlelight dancing in her eyes, and in that moment, under the warm lights and the gentle fall of snow beyond the windows, something unspoken filled the air, a promise waiting to be said aloud. Sophie's lips curled into a teasing smile, the candlelight flickering in her eyes. "What is this?" she joked lightly, though her voice trembled at the depth she saw in Daniel's gaze. "Another one of your fake bentos." But the moment she saw his expression, so sincere, so full of unspoken love, her heart skipped. Daniel opened the small velvet box, revealing a simple yet beautiful silver ring. Engraved on the outside were the words, "Not just one night." Inside the band, delicately etched, was a tiny star that caught the candlelight and glinted softly, a silent witness to all they had overcome. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his voice thick with emotion, yet warm like the home they had found in each other. "Sophie," he said, "you are the brightest star in my darkest nights. You showed me who I could become, not for anyone else's expectations, but for my own. And this time, I am keeping you, forever, the way you have kept the light alive for me." Sophie blinked back tears, laughing softly through the swell of emotion. "This time," she whispered, her voice breaking with joy, "I am saving your number, just in case you forget." She nodded, unable to say more, letting him slip the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. Grasping his hand tightly, she leaned closer, whispering, "Daniel, you are my home, and I am not letting you go." They left the restaurant hand in hand, stepping into New York's snowy night. Snowflakes dusted their shoulders, softening the city's edges, making it feel like a dream stitched together with hope and second chances. Their laughter echoed into the cold night air, not the careful laughter of adults, but the free, reckless sound of children reclaiming something lost. Above them, a bright star shone down, bearing silent witness to a vow no longer made just for a moment, but for a lifetime. Daniel pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and together they stood in the snow, feeling the completeness of a love that had been forged in the fires of loss and found again beneath the stars. Months later, Daniel and Sophie were married in the most fitting place of all the Westchester Charity Center, where once they had knelt among children and drawn crooked stars together. It was a simple ceremony, filled only with those who had truly walked their journey alongside them, close friends, the team at Horizon Tech, and dozens of laughing children from the center. Sophie wore a simple white dress, her star necklace gleaming like a quiet promise against her heart. Daniel wore a deep blue suit, the familiar pocket watch pinned proudly to his vest. Ethan, now thriving in his new home, proudly carried the flower basket, scattering petals with beaming joy. As they exchanged vows, Sophie looked up at Daniel, her voice steady, her soul open. "You are the star I found in the night," she said, "and I will keep you forever." "Moved beyond words," Daniel replied, his voice low and reverent. "And you are the light that led me home." When they kissed, the children tossed handfuls of star-shaped confetti into the springtime air, and the garden burst with laughter and light. The years that followed were filled with a different kind of success, one measured not in wealth alone, but in lives touched and futures changed. Under Daniel's leadership, Horizon Tech flourished, becoming a beacon of how a company could grow with heart, not just ambition. Their orphan support fund thrived, replicated across the country, offering thousands of children a new beginning. Sophie opened a larger law office in Brooklyn, dedicating her career to protecting vulnerable children and families. And together, they often returned to the Westchester Center, hosting art days and storytelling sessions where Daniel's lopsided stars continued to make the children roar with laughter. Each smile they saw reflected a small piece of their own journey, proof that even broken hearts could find new rhythms, that even lonely children could find their way home. On quiet nights, Daniel and Sophie would sit together on their apartment balcony, wrapped in warm blankets, pointing out stars and laughing about that first clumsy night by the sea. Daniel always carried the pocket watch, its ticking now a song of hope, not survival. Sophie always wore her star necklace, a reminder that light, once found, could guide you forever. The pain they once carried had not vanished, but it had been transformed, woven into a story bigger and brighter than either had dared imagine. 40 years later, on a golden summer evening, Daniel and Sophie sat side by side on the porch of their Westchester home, The fields stretched out endlessly before them, kissed by sunlight and wildflowers. At 74, Daniel's hair had turned silver, but his gray eyes still sparkled whenever he looked at Sophie. And at 70, Sophie's hair was streaked with soft threads of white, but her smile was as luminous as the first day he had seen her on that beach. They sat in old wooden chairs, hands entwined, watching the stars emerge one by one above the quiet fields. Their love, once fragile and uncertain, had grown deep and enduring, a lighthouse against every storm, a testament to promises kept, not just for one night, but for forever. Sophie's brown hair, now threaded with strands of silver, framed her face softly. The star necklace she wore, once brilliant silver, had dulled over the years, but under the moonlight, it still gleamed like a quiet promise. On the small table between them sat the old pocket watch, its faint ticking steady and sure, the heartbeat of a love that had endured through every season of life. Above them, the night unfurled, stars scattered across the black velvet sky, glistening like memories stitched into the fabric of forever. Daniel held Sophie's hand, their fingers intertwined just as they had been on that night so long ago. The simple silver ring, still engraved with "Not just one night," glimmered softly on her finger. "See, our star?" Daniel asked, his voice low and warm, pointing to a brilliant light in the southern sky. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "You always think you found it," she said, her voice full of affection, but her eyes, shining under the starlight, were brimming with memories. They had lived fully, truly, beautifully. The orphan support fund they had built together had grown into a global network, providing homes, hope, and dreams for thousands of children who had once been forgotten. Horizon Tech, once the dream of a man trying to outrun his past, had become a beacon of innovation and heart, led first by Daniel, and then lovingly passed down to their children. Sophie, though retired from her fierce battles in courtrooms, still visited charity centers, often her days spent teaching new generations how to draw stars, just as she once had with Ethan, who had grown to become a renowned artist and advocate. Their home was rarely quiet. Their 3 children and 5 grandchildren filled it with laughter and stories, new tales woven into the old ones, the house pulsing with the vibrant, ever-growing life they had once only dared to dream about. "We did it, did we not?" Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion as he gazed up at the glittering night. "Not just one night," Sophie answered, squeezing his hand, "but a lifetime." She turned to him, her smile soft, her heart still full after all these years. "More than that, Daniel, we gave each other the whole sky." They sat there, under a canopy of stars, their hands still tightly clasped, their hearts still beating in quiet harmony. Time had left its marks silver in their hair, softer lines on their faces, but it had not dimmed what mattered. Their love, once fragile and born from loneliness, now shone with the strength of 1,000 suns. It stretched beyond seasons, beyond years, beyond fear. It was written into the very stars above them, a love that had begun with a simple promise on a beach, and ended with a sky they built together, guided, always, by that first unwavering light. Under a sky stitched with stars, Daniel and Sophie sat hand in hand, 2 hearts that once wandered lost, now home at last. Their journey wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. It was built from rain-soaked promises, lopsided drawings, whispered hopes, and battles fought in silence. But in the end, love was not just about grand moments. It was about choosing each other, again and again, in fear, in doubt, in joy, and in all the small, quiet spaces in between. They had once dreamed of not just one night, and together, they built a forever. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the beauty hidden in small moments and second chances, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you won't miss any more journeys that heal, inspire, and light up the soul. Thank you for listening. And until we meet again, may you always find your own star to follow.